Hello, everybody. I'm Wizzy, and on this channel, we'll dive into the latest updates and developments concerning Prince Harry and Duchess Meghan. Today, we're going to be covering the Dan Wootton saga. I'm sure you have heard or seen the story making the rounds. I have researched this matter meticulously, and it has allowed me to provide you with a comprehensive overview of the situation. Given the complexity of this narrative, I've decided to break it down into a series of videos. Typically, I schedule my videos for release on Fridays, ensuring that my audience has a video to unwind with after a week of hard work. However, due to the overwhelming volume of crucial information involved in this case, we will release the follow-up video on Saturday, followed by subsequent installments until we've covered all aspects of this story as we know it to date. Stay tuned for an in-depth and funny exploration of the Dan Wootton Laurence Fox scandal. Okay, guys, so let's dive in. After the failure of Prince William's trip to New York, where he had gone to announce the finalists of the Earthshot Prize competition for 2023, a wave of critical headlines emerged targeting Harry and Meghan. Like Meghan and Harry's covert trip to Portugal, Duke and Duchess of Sussex face backlash for requesting a gagging clause from a school during a 2021 visit. Duchess of Sussex attempts to reposition book as a charity visit. I'm no expert, but I wonder why this was a problem. Even if she did try to reposition the book reading as a charity visit, I wonder, did she get paid? Anyway, we continue. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle slammed over excessive flight amid environmental claims. Kate Middleton has put reconciliation with incredibly disloyal Prince Harry and Meghan Markle on ice, experts claim. Who those experts are, no one knows, but okay, experts. It appeared that these negative headlines were an attempt to counter the positive press Harry and Meghan had received following the success of the Invictus Games. However, unlike previous years, these headlines seem to have less impact. The headlines hit differently and the media panicked big time. Before we get into what happened, if you're new here, please subscribe to our channel, click the like button, share the video, hit the notification bell. The analytics on my channel tells me that 70% of the people who watch my videos are not subscribers. So please go ahead, subscribe to my channel. If you're a returning subscriber, welcome back to my channel. So good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to hit the like button and the notification bell so you know when next I upload my next video. Getting back to the matter. So, in an effort to shift the spotlight away from Harry and Meghan, Kate was sent to visit a textile factory, perhaps as a reminder to the British people of where their loyalties should lie, should they begin to soften against Harry and Meghan following the success of the Invictus Games. Unfortunately for Kate, these public appearances are not her strong suit, and she proceeded to bore everyone in attendance. Just look at the faces of the staff in the picture on the left. And the images from the visit were reminiscent of her and William's disastrous Caribbean tour. The optics were just unfortunate. It's quite clear that someone within Kensington Palace was hoping for a distraction, and this distraction came in the form of a scandal involving Dan Wootton, which quickly escalated. Dan Wootton, known for previous controversies including catfishing and sexual misconduct allegations, had a segment on his show called Would You, where he and Laurence Fox discussed journalist Ava Evans' stance on male mental health. Laurence Fox's comments on the show were exposed when Ava posted a clip highlighting their worst comments on Twitter. Simon of Twitter fame reposted the Ava clip. This prompted me to go listen to the segment, and it was indeed grim. As a matter of fact, if Ava herself hadn't posted it, I would have believed that it was a skit. Ava's tweet reposting the worst of the discussion between Lawrence and Dan led to Dan issuing a public apology to Ava. A surprising move from Dan given his past behavior. I thought to myself, Dan Wootton never apologizes. So what gives? Before you know what was happening, another apology from Dan to Ava popped up on my timeline. At this point, I knew something was up. Something big was about to go down, and it was not going to be business as usual. The next thing I saw was Fox's tweet outing Dan Wootton. Fox's tweet proved that not only was Dan Wootton's latest tweet apologizing to Ava Evans fake, his previous tweet apologizing to Ava had been fake as well. I collapsed. Here is the leaked conversation between Dan Wootton and Laurence Fox. I knew at this point that Lawrence had effectively achieved what other people had tried to achieve with pain and suffering without success. The move was Machiavellian to say the least, but efficiently done. It almost made me feel like it was a setup. The emojis beside the chat represent my emotions as the scandal took place. I think I collapsed again. When I came to, I saw Carol Vorderman's tweet. By the way, for those not on Twitter, Carol Vorderman is a national treasure. If you don't follow her, go ahead and follow her already. Carol had just reposted Lawrence Fox's tweet, which confirmed that Dan Wootton knew exactly what he was going to be saying when he came on the show, contrary to the excuses made by Dan in his apology to Ava. I guess that after Dan Wootton's apology, it appeared to Lawrence that Dan was going to be shifting the blame of what happened to him. And he made a decision to get ahead of the story by exposing the entire arrangement between himself, the network, and Dan Wootton. No doubt he thought, if I'm going to go down, I will not be going down alone. By this time, I and the entire country, what am I saying? Sorry, the world watched in real time the GB News reality show that ensued. When I say GB News imploded, I'm not exaggerating. First, it was Lawrence Fox's apology video. I listened to it and realized that it was not so much of an apology but a further rant because Lawrence Fox was not repentant. He just used the video to cry about Dan Wootton's perceived disloyalty. To his mind, he felt like Dan Wootton should not have apologized because Dan Wootton's apology contradicts his stand against censorship of free speech. Just stopping briefly for a little rant. This is what I don't get about these right wing extremists who advocate for things from a one sided perspective. Of course, we have the right to free speech by the Constitution and the various bylaws to which the UK and all UK subjects are subject, such as the Human Rights Act. But for every right granted by law, there is another law which limits the right granted by the same law. For instance, common law says one man's right to swing his hand ends where another man's right to protect his face begins. Of course, we have the right to free speech. These are rights which have been granted by the Constitution and the various bylaws to which all UK subjects are subject, such as the Human Rights Act. But for every right granted by law, there is another law which limits the right granted by the same law. For instance, common law says one man's right to swing his hands ends where another man's right to protect his face begins. So that in a practical sense, everyone has the right to say what they like, but should not complain when they attract the consequences of their right to free speech. That's only fair, right? Okay, so the beginnings of consequences for Lawrence Fox was that GB News, no doubt duty bound, following the backlash, launched an investigation into his inappropriate comments on Dan Wootton's show. As though this scandal was the excuse GB News had been waiting for, they issued a formal statement online confirming that they had suspended Lawrence Fox. When I tell you, When I tell you that Twitter exploded with discussions, reactions, and particularly about Lawrence Fox's suspension. In response to Lawrence Fox's suspension, the person whose response caught everyone's eye was none other than our resident Chucky doll, Angela Levin, who said, "A very rich man keeps Lawrence Fox. Nothing sexy in it, so he's unlikely to scrub toilets, and he knows it." To which Lawrence Fox replied, "Just so we're clear, I would rather scrub toilets for the rest of my days and retain my dignity." This was too much for my fragile heart. I had just caught my breath from the release of Lawrence and Dan's WhatsApp messages. My chest! After I had enjoyed my 200th belly cleansing laugh for that day, I thought the agents of hell are attacking each other. Love it! And before I could say hallelujah, Dan Wootton was suspended. I guess for the network, letting the behavior of Dan Wootton continue without repercussion would attract attention to the network that even the right wing audience of GB News would not tolerate. Besides, there was a public violation of Ofcom rules. So if you think about it, there was really no other recourse to be expected from GB News. Also, it meant that if Dan Wootton was allowed to continue to present, it would become public knowledge that Ofcom was ineffective. And that could not be had because there is an illusion that there are actual safeguards in place to protect the British public from the media. Let's go into the discussion of the landscape as it relates to Ofcom for a moment. The way it works is that the head of Ofcom is appointed by the government in power. The current CEO of Ofcom, Melanie Dawes, is married to the former chief political correspondent and deputy editor of The Telegraph. To make matters worse, not too long ago, the chairman of Ofcom, separate from the CEO of Ofcom, okay, Lord Grade, recently declared that he cheers when Lawrence Fox comes on when he was on Question Time. To give a bit of background, Lord Grade, the chairman of Ofcom's father, and Lawrence Fox's grandfather were partners in business. When they say they are referring this scandal to Ofcom, what do we think the likely outcome of that referral is going to be? Nevertheless, they must put up some kind of illusion to make us think that the media will penalize the media houses when they overstep. Hold that thought. We'll be back to it in a second. First, let's go back to Dan Wootton's suspension. Okay, but not okay, right? That's a job half done. What about all the people who have been victims of this kind of personal attacks from Dan Wootton in the recent past, like Meghan Markle, Caroline Flack, to name a couple? But again, we'll come back to this point because so many things happened as this saga went on that if we get stuck on this point, I will struggle to complete the narration of the sequence of events. If I can't come back to this point in this video, we'll discuss it in the next part of this series because it is quite important to this story. Before we move on, please can I ask you to subscribe if you haven't already done so, like and share this video for our good friend the algorithm who will share this video with a wider audience if it sees that I have enough subscribers and engagement in this video. Thank you. Now, getting back to Dan Wootton's suspension, I thought Dan Wootton was the anointed one and this could never happen. When I tell you that Twitter was in a meltdown, believe me, Twitter collapsed in collective laughter, and the celebration of Dan Wootton's downfall was loud. The last time I saw people so happy about something like this happening to a public figure was when Donald Trump lost the elections. Continuing, Simon of Twitter fame said about Dan Wootton's suspension. And then he was suspended too, even though he furiously tried to backtrack. Following Dan Wootton's suspension, Kevin Sutherland, one of Dan Wootton's former victims, came out to say, "So, Lawrence Fox is suspended for making a vile comment. Yet, Dan Wootton, who raped me and is a well known sexual deviant and has now been exposed in yet another lie, is allowed to continue to smile on that platform and re traumatize his victims daily. What the F? Angry face, angry face, angry face. Now, I must say, you can't tell people how to recover from trauma, but I wonder whether these kind of tweets from Kevin Sutherland are really helpful for him. I hope so anyway. Honestly, I had mixed feelings about these tweets because it seemed like this man is still in pain from what happened to him. But on the other hand, hell yeah, he's right. How does Dan Wooten still have his job? It must have been all of 15 minutes later when I saw a headline confirming that Dan Wooten's contract with Mail Online, where he had a column, had been terminated. Remember, I said to you that things were moving really fast. At this point, I had given up trying to screenshot the tweets. I was just saving everything to go through later. As this news was published, all media houses began to report on it. Someone with good conscience asked, Success Squad, how are you feeling? My God, when I tell you I needed that health check, can I just say to the squaddy who checked in on us during the avalanche of news about Dan Wooten, thank you for your service. You were doing God's work. You brought me back to reality. Okay, so, as you do, I stepped out again to begin my notes on this story, and by the time I returned, Dan Wooten's arch nemesis and the new media sheriff in town, Byline Times, had published an article which outlined the details of the scandal leading to the suspension of Lawrence Fox and Dan Wooten, which I will not be going into again as we have already discussed the events leading up to the suspension of the gruesome twosome. What I did find interesting from the article was the information they provided about what was going on behind the scenes at GB News. They said that GB News chief executive Angelos Frangopoulos announced the suspension and pledged to investigate the comments made about the segment. However, he suggested that the threat of staff insurrection and concerns about Wooten's handling of the segment contributed to his suspension. Don't forget that Byline Times had revealed in their previous series about the catfishing allegations against Dan Wooten that Angelos Frangopoulos also had some sexual misconduct allegations levied against him, and this may account for his seeming reluctance to move swiftly in this matter. Some sources within GB News believe that neither Fox nor Wooten will return to the channel. They went on to say, employees describe GB News as a rudderless organization that has lost experienced journalists due to issues related to presenter power and management's refusal to address potential breaches of the Ofcom code. Despite claims to the contrary, the network's workplace culture has been criticized. This incident could lead to another Ofcom investigation, adding to the 11 ongoing investigations and three previously upheld complaints against GB News. Furthermore, Byline Times has made allegations against Wooten's private conduct, including allegations of catfishing, leading to investigations by his former employers and his suspension from Mail Online. As a result of the allegations made by the Byline Times, a journalist was targeted with sophisticated and persistent cyber attacks. So, in reaction to Dan Wooten's suspension, a Twitter user spoke my mind when she said, laughing in karma. By this time, the outcry on Twitter was so loud, it felt like every tweet was screaming their shock in 4K. And before we had the opportunity to recover from the first article, Byline Times published another article about the situation titled Cancelling the Canceller. In this article, Byline Times discussed Dan Wooten and his co-presenter's suspension. While we were all trying to digest the recent goings on, the implications for Dan Wooten, Lawrence Fox, and GB News, and perhaps also to pick our jaws up from the floor, Byline Times dropped another bombshell article, this time discussing the actions of BBC presenter Ben Davies, who shut down SNP MP John Nicholson, who had been invited onto the show to discuss other issues, but who sought to mention the allegations against Dan Wootton as a way of illustrating a point he had been making. As we all know, the allegations to which the MP was referring are those which relate to the Byline Times allegation that Dan Wootton had used fake online identities to obtain compromising sexual material on several men. Wootton denies any criminality. It's interesting to note that the BBC presenter Davies appeared to be on the defensive in the interview as he questioned whether Nicholson's views amounted to wanting to censor channels that aired opinions he disagreed with. Nicholson clarified that he didn't seek censorship but wanted Ofcom to enforce its own rules. Refusing to be politely shut up by the presenter during the interview, Nicholson insisted that the allegations against Wootton were relevant to the conversation he was having with the presenter. And do you know what? In a shocking turn of events, Davies, the BBC presenter, abruptly ended the interview. Byline Time goes on to say that after the program aired, a producer contacted Nicholson to explain that the show did not want to discuss Byline Time's allegations because they considered them to be unfounded. Nicholson questioned this stance, highlighting the fact that the investigation into the Byline Times allegations was detailed and well sourced. So far, BBC has been unable to explain why the show's producer had labeled the allegations as unfounded, but stated that the time constraints of live news programs limited their ability to delve into the details of the allegations. This led to a discussion about BBC's stance on the allegations, as it looked like the BBC was refusing to discuss Dan Wootton's allegations in solidarity with a colleague. Suffice to say, the latest Dan Wootton scandal has sent shockwaves through the media industry and the country as a whole, raising important questions regarding ethics, accountability, and corruption. I'm going to end this video here. Thank you for joining me on part 1 of this deep dive into this version of the Dan Wootton scandal. Tune in tomorrow for the next installment of this series. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the video. Don't forget to also hit the notification bell so you know when next I upload my next video. Until next time, keep focused, keep shining, and keep thriving. Bye!